DC and Marvel have clearly hit on something huge with their absolute and ultimate lines. And one of the things that we always talk about that Dan Didio has illuminated beautifully in the past is that the comic book industry lost at least two generations of potential readers by not doing outreach to possible new fans. The question here today is, have the absolute and ultimate lines been able to be the bridge to the next generation of comic book readers to get them into the fold and potentially make new lifelong comic book readers, which is something that we desperately need?
uh, be it the numbers that prove it in the stores, anecdotally with our community, we've seen an influx of people, new readers in particular, who for the first time are making contact with superheroes, who are making contact with comics. There was an article a few months back saying that, just taking a look at polling different shops, they've seen an influx of uh, kids. I think that was a local story even that stated it here in New York. And then we've seen new people join the fray, answer comments being like, "Hey, I'm a first time reader. I don't know where else to go from here." I think that that lost generation is maybe being picked up by like an ultimate line where people are kind of coming back into the fold, lapse readers, but the absolute might be tapping into an otherwise newer market, younger market that is hungry to read these kinds of books.
Yeah, that's where I'm coming at it from. Where I don't know if the ultimate books are doing this lost generation finding, but more of a lapsed generation. I feel it's with Ultimate Spider-Man, it's doing the thing that people have been asking for Spider-Man for years, and then we're letting that experiment happen. I think Ultimates at Marvel, the Ultimates proper book, uh, has a little more buzz going around it, but I can't say the same for the whole line as a whole. Um, I think the Absolute though is definitely doing what Didio had hoped to do. I mean, it's not killing Nightwing, but it is enough to to pull people in and make an enticing enough world to pull people in. And I think it did it in a really smart way. A, it got it was creator focused. That was Scott Snyder's kind of mission objective there. Find creators to do this, and then we will build on that. Started with new number ones. I know people hate it, but it is an entry point for people. If this is the first issue of Absolute Batman, first issue of Absolute Wonder Woman. This Whenever anyone picks up manga, they got to start the first issue. It's just the way people's minds work. You don't really start at an episode 5 of a new TV show. Start at 1. So I think it just works for new people to get in. And they pushed it. They put money behind it and getting people to read it. We've had people in the Discord saying that's how they got into comics and how they found us and how they got on the Discord was through the Absolute books. I was at a bar reading Absolute Batman, and a guy came up to me and asked me about the book. That has never happened to me in the history of me reading comic books. That I've been like, "Yo, what is that?" And it was the Absolute Mister Freeze arc. So the art was very different. But I think that different, and that's to lend to the creator side of things, is enticing to people. It looks different. It's like, ooh, shiny new thing. What is that? And I think I'm doing a really good job with it.
So I think that the answer to this question is yes. I think that these lines, these micro lines, are bringing in new and lapse. Lapse is definitely a good point. Bringing in both of those kinds of people into the fold. And anecdotally speaking, we see it in our comments all the time. Marco's right. We get those comments constantly from people who are brand spanking new, who've only been reading comics for the last year, and every single time they say what they're reading on that list is Absolute if they read DC and Ultimate if they read Marvel. I can't think of a single time where someone has said, "Oh yeah, I don't read any of that type of stuff." If they're a new reader, they're reading those books for sure. And I think back to when the Absolute line first started and all of the fan art that people were doing for Absolute Wonder Woman. It was even for Superman. I saw so much of it people in love with Absolute Batman's new design and the Hulk aspect of that stuff. Even the Ultimate line, people were going nuts when the new Hawkeye was revealed. People were loving that new version of the character, the new Luke Cage. These are these are these are characters that are finally bringing people who never felt represented into the mix. And so they're coming into the fold. Oh wow, there's a native Hawkeye. That's pretty interesting. Let me check that out. Oh wow, this version of Luke Cage is in a black exploitation character. Let me check that out.
And this is a generation that grew up on comics. Like this is not the format of a comic book is not new to them. These are kids that grew up with like Captain Underpants. They grew up with Dogman. They grew up with reading stuff like that or reading manga. Yeah, you read it the other way, which is wrong, but it is still a familiarity with the medium. Um, and it's always been insane to me that we've never really been able to grip that kind of audience into mainline big two floppy comics.
There feels like there's a lack of a stopgap in there, right? To transition somebody from the dog man to a mainline, and so once they're exposed to the world, they find their own thing. Maybe it's also the time frame, right? Like it's a you're an adolescent, you're finding out what you like, even maybe you're trying different things, there's an openness to it, but there isn't the habituation. And I think that what the ultimate and absolute lines, and for that to that point, Energon is doing is creating a new habituation for these people to come into the fold and to continue on from there, and ideally that generation passes it on to the next, and so on and so forth, and that's you get us.
100%. The greatest example of this that I can think of is the OG Ultimate line and what Ultimate Spider-Man did for comics. Um, I I think Ultimate Spider-Man saved comics because of how massive that series was in terms of bringing people into the fold who had never read comics before. But it was also the book. If you ask anybody, what was the book that brought you back to comics after you stopped reading them in the 90s? I think a lot of those people will say things like Ultimate Spider Man. And the reason for that is because it was taking a character that we were already deeply familiar with and remixing it. How many people, even then, even in 2000, had read Amazing Fantasy 15 as a kid? Not that many, because it was 30 years or nearly 40 years before. So it was an opportunity for you for the first time to see Peter's first adventure, his first kiss, his first love, all these firsts alongside the new generation of comics fans like Tyler and I, even though we weren't reading at exactly that moment in time, we were that next generation up who were having those moments in our own lives.
And
Uh,
that blueprint is what Absolute is doing. Like one to one, really. That was Bendis at the time, a relatively not unknown, but he was up and coming creator at the time. And Bagley, Bagley was a little more of a surefire bet at the time, but his art style was still more modern. Um, so even the creative aspect of it's there. It found the creative to tell a new interesting take on this, and which is exactly what Snyder and Dragotta are doing on Batman, what Kelly Thompson and Hayden Sherman are doing on Wonder Woman. It's just there.
what Scott and Capullo did with New 52. I mean, that's the reason I'm a reader now, right? Like those generations, those waves happen in these chunks, and we've hit and are at the precipice of that new generation, and now I feel like there's a responsibility for the community to embrace those people, point them in the right direction, make them read some Swamp Thing, guys. This was
This
all a ploy.
The more we talk about this, and the more we just say Didio was right, it makes me realize, man, 5G would have been interesting. Just to see what would have happened there.
That's a whole can of worms. But
Which
the new 52, I definitely think is good to bring up in this conversation as well because there's an entire generation of DC fans whose first exposure was the new 52, even if it wasn't in comics. And that's the thing about the new 52 that a lot of people forget about is that the new 52 was also the status quo in DC animation. all those
Mm.
animated series and stuff that were coming out, not the shows, but the movies that they were doing, were all based on what was happening in the New 52.
And there is a huge subset of the DC fandom that gets DC through animation only.
Yeah. Yeah.
God,
And
they're
and
missing
you
out.
you can see things like that really clearly in the popularity of a character like Red Hood, who people who read comics can sometimes be like, whatever about, but Red Hood has a massive following, and I think a lot of that has to do with the Under the Red Hood animated movie that was extremely popular.
That movie's good. It's
It is good,
it's
yeah.
better than the way the comics did it. So yeah, I don't doubt that at all. And then and it also extends to the games at the time. They were doing a Red Hood game with Arkham Knight. Spoiler, whoops. Uh, and I think stuff like that, like the Transmedia was able to do creative things and new things with the characters.
Will the Absolute and DC universes be spoken about? Because now we're living in history. You know, will this time period be spoken about in the same way that specifically the Ultimate Universe was? But you could even extend that out to the New 52. Will we be doing stuff like the Absolute and Ultimate Universe retrospective, where we talk about all the great things it did for the industry and how it revolutionized things? Or is this just a successful gimmick for the time that will pass and we'll move on?
I think the Absolute line right now feels a lot like the original Ultimates line. And what the future of that will be, I can more properly judge once the original creators are off the books and see where those books keep going. The Ultimates line right now feels like a blip. I'm not sure this thing lasts longer than, as long as the original Ultimates line. I think right now Absolute has a lot more longevity. And I think the current Absolute line, the current Ultimate line is a deep dive a couple years later. It's like, oh, what went wrong in the creation of the Ultimates 2.0? That being said, we'll see what Ultimate Endgame is like. Maybe that's their place to kind of re-solidify what they're doing.
I think based on the moment we're in now, I would agree that because of the perceived quality from my part, the ultimate feels like a blip. Like that'll be a deep dive coming out in maybe like 2 3 years, and absolute will have that longevity. But I think to what Tyler was alluding to with the creators coming off the books, if they do or when they do, is does the quality maintain? That'll be the deciding factor. Is this enough of an? Is this still enough of a seller and initiative and like driver of new readership that warrants the the books? It could very well be a situation where uh Absolute Batman and the Absolute line gets such good press, is of high quality, but maybe the higher ups don't see the numbers. They are right now, right? But there could exist a time where that doesn't happen. It maintains quality, but it dips in its prevalence, and uh, then maybe maybe we're talking about that in a few years. It has to stay the course.
Truth be told, I don't actually think that we're having massive conversations about either line in 10 years. I think that I'm in the middle of rereading Ultimate Spider-Man right now, and Ultimate X-Men for that matter. And the biggest difference that I notice between those two books and frankly everything that's coming out from both micro lines is that the characters were at the forefront. And it doesn't feel like they are right now. Spider-Man doesn't even suit up for the first 4 or 5 issues of
Oh,
Ultimate Spider-Man. Um, and that's okay. You read it and it's like, wow, this is all about Peter. This is all about his journey. It establishes Uncle Ben and Aunt May. Keep in mind, at that point in time, Uncle Ben was not a character, he was a lesson. No, there hadn't really been, he's dead within panels of the original Amazing Fantasy, and that's it. So to me, that's the biggest difference, is that you really got to live with Peter and understand him and connect to him in a way that I don't know that any of these books are really doing with their character. They're very plot focused and forward. And that, to me, doesn't stand the test of time.
Mm.
Once that story is done, the book's done. And if it's a character centric, the character can keep going.
Unless they make it Bruce Wayne, this uh, this Diana, all that stuff, right? This Cal.
Yeah, like the version of Captain America that we got in the Ultimates, whether you like that version or not, is a very clear picture of a character. And that clear picture captured a lot of people's attention. Maybe we meme that version now, but that was a big deal at the time.
And in the foil, the current Ultimate Captain America,
It was a dude.
is a guy in the book. The book is all plot, which I'm enjoying, and I think in the short term is really good. But long term, like no, that I couldn't tell you the difference between that Steve and current continuity 616 Steve.
Time will tell. We could always be wrong. But leave it in the comments what you think. Do you think that these micro lines are going to be talked about on a massive scale the way we reflect on things like the OG Ultimate Universe or New 52? Or do you think this is a flash in the pan? Leave it in the comments. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.